June 1st, 2025 won't only be recorded as the date that Ukraine used a few $1,000s in drones to eliminate over $1 billion of Russian combat aircraft, but also the first recorded use of AI to conduct a strike in the history of war. Is this going to change the battlefield forever? And how did Ukraine use the same technology that college students use to write their essays to write their names in the history books? Did you like that one? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to talk about that. Plus, those peace negotiations are still going on, even though Russia is, of course, not doing anything. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is absolutely crazy. As you guys know, Operation Spiderweb, we're learning more and more details about it as Ukraine struck literally hundreds of or dozens of Russia's most sophisticated combat aircraft. And most significant is that thanks to the sanctions, Russia is unable to build new ones. And this is a really pretty devastating blow to Russia. Not only do they use these strategic aircraft to launch cruise missiles into Ukraine, but also these are parts of Russia's strategic bomber reserve. And the key is that Russia, like the United States, has what's called a nuclear triad, which means that in terms of countering an adversary, right, their mutually assured destruction, right, the sort of if we nuke you, if you nuke us, we'll nuke you back, relies on three prongs, right, which is, of course, submarine launched ballistic missiles, strategic ICBMs in land-based silos, and of course, weapons launched from bombers. And so taking out one of those legs of the nuclear triad definitely it makes Russia feel much less safe on the international stage. However, the real story is the what. And we're learning that these 120 FPV drones that went into the heart of Russia and destroyed Moscow's strategic bomber fleet, or at least a large portion of it. Early reports indicate about 35% of all Russian strategic bombers have been taken out, were powered by AI, right? Now, what's fascinating is that this was actually leaked in July of last year. A report called the Clash Report was saying that Ukraine was training AI targeting algorithms using Soviet aircraft at military museums, right? And this was fascinating because, again, you can see that this was tweeted, I think around... all right, this is June 1st, but that's the actual disclosure of the Spiderweb operation. I think this is from back in July, almost a year ago. And we've heard from the Ukrainian sources that this operation took about 18 months to consolidate, right, to plan and execute. So what's fascinating is that the reports are that actually... the AI was able to identify the most vulnerable areas of the bombers and then train the algorithms, which would allow the FPV drones to independently recognize and engage targets, right? Videos captured during Sunday's attacks attest the drones simply didn't crash into the targets, but they actually maneuvered into areas where maximum damage was most likely to be caused. This included pylons carrying the cruise missiles and the areas of their fuel tanks, right? And so what is really fascinating about this is that we have heard that the models, right? One, we know that Ukraine has been compiling a lot of data to train their FPV drone attack models. And that is something that they've actually incentivized. In fact, every time a drone pilot in Ukraine uploads video of a successful strike, they actually receive, for lack of a better term, an in-game currency, essentially, that they can then use to go to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and say, hey, we'd like some extra FPV drones, extra jammers, extra thermal blankets, right? Literally, the gamification of war is just reaching its apex, right? Are we going to have loot boxes soon? Probably. But what Ukraine is doing, why would Ukraine reward units for uploading video of successful strikes? It's not just to confirm that operations and help gather data. It's about the actual video itself that's so valuable, because that video is used to train these FPV drones to fly as strike packages, right? So you can, because the math is very simple on this, right? Right now, unjammable fiber optic drones cost about 10 times as much as a standard radio controlled FPV drone, right? It's about $5,000. The cost is coming down somewhat, but it's around $5,000 a unit compared to about $500 a unit for a standard FPV drone that can be jammed. However, if you could design an AI software that can continue to fly the drone in spite of jamming, what you would have then is a software solution. So instead of $4,000 of fiber optic cable, you would be able to simply have the drone fly to its target. You would have a human operator ping the target, say, hey, you see that Russian tank? I want you to take it out. And then as the AI drone went inside the electronic warfare, the jamming bubble, right? The AI drone would continue to do its job, flying into the target and boop, taking it out. And so the Ukrainians said, listen, we may not have enough to make this technology work everywhere against every target, right? Because that's really hard. Remember, this AI would have to work in the rain. It has to work in the snow. It has to work against camouflage as Russians build more sophisticated camouflage. But they said it's definitely good enough to hit a giant target that is unlikely to be camouflaged. And that is exactly what an aircraft sitting on a runway looks like. So reportedly, the Ukrainians actually went to a military museum and they flew FPVs dozens, likely hundreds of times into and around these aircraft, training the AI to understand, for lack of a better term, what these strategic aircraft look like from every single angle, right? And so the data that Ukraine gathered and trained these models on, right, included target data of the aircraft being viewed from all different angles in different lighting and in different weather conditions, right? And so it allowed them to say, okay, this AI can confidently finish the fight, right? And that's sort of the appeal of this process, is that by getting the drones as close to the airfield as possible, you minimize the amount of time for the AI to get confused, right? It didn't have to learn how to navigate all the way to the airfield. It said, listen, we're going to let you loose in this airfield. We're going to point you in a direction, and you are just going to troll around looking for these targets that we trained you on. And that went off spectacularly by almost every account. We've seen video, for example, of the AI actually maneuvering around smoke, columns of smoke of already destroyed aircraft, moving in towards other aircraft, which is actually not an insignificant danger, because the AI may also sit there and look at an aircraft that's already been hit and say, well, I'm going to hit that because clearly it's still the aircraft. You wouldn't want these 150 drones to hit, the same aircraft 150 times. You want them to hit, again, 20, 30, 40 aircraft. And what I think is so significant about this, what I really want to talk about, is that the thing is, AI is, what we've seen is sort of self-referential, i.e. the more it's used, the more it gets feedback on its effectiveness, the better it gets, right? So unlike a human being, where if a Marine squad attacks a bunker, and then you say, attack a bunker again, and attack a bunker again, and attack a bunker again, they're going to grow in experience, but they're also going to get worn down. They are going to become physically tired. That squad is going to have take more and more casualties. They're going to run lower and lower on ammo. AI just doesn't really have this process because software doesn't get tired, right? And while an individual physical drone may be destroyed, the software itself remains intact, right? It's software. And the software is going to continually be refined more and more as it gathers more data from successful strikes. And so it's essentially going to be like more like a unit in a video game, where the unit grows in experience from a fight, but it doesn't experience any of the human attrition, right? Exhaustion, demoralization, casualties, right? Small and big wounds that prevent them from being as combat effective. So the fact that this strike was successful indicates that there may actually be more successful strikes by Ukrainian drones in the future. But the real story is that this changes the fundamentals of the battlefield. Now, I want to add that because we've seen some of the drone footage from these, it makes me think that there may have been human operators, and the AI may have been some kind of assistive technology or sort of a backup in case the signal got kind of janky, because somehow this footage was being recorded by someone. But I still think the attribution to this for this attack is definitely the AI. And what's crazy is that this marks a point in which a $500 or $600 drone powered by software, where the cost of the software was nil, it was able to operate independently, untethered, unconnected, or could be unconnected with the Ukrainian operators, and was able to conduct a independent strike against these targets. What does that mean? Well, you have to understand, it's, again, think about it like the driverless cars, right? Let's say I could snap my fingers and turn every single Uber and taxi into a driverless car. What does that mean? Well, a taxi driver can work eight hours a day, and then he's got to stop, right? The human becomes physically exhausted, they lose focus. AI doesn't have that problem. They will run 24 hours a day until the car itself breaks. So you're talking about a massive, massive shift in sort of the economics of transport, right? You can also have, there's no bathroom breaks. There's no food breaks. There's no getting distracted and taking a call. There's none of it. It is perfect, and it is dialed in all of the time. And so you take, for example, the cost of getting a ride, of going somewhere, drops from, let's say $24 or whatever the average Uber ride is. It would probably drop down to, once you get an economy of scale, down to as little as $3 or $4. And you can see the massive difference that stands to make. If you can take a ride for $3 or $4, you may not need to even own a car, right? Now apply the same sort of logic to drone warfare. Why would you ever build a $1 billion bomber? Why would you ever build something like an F-35 if a $500 drone can take it out? Particularly because these drones, they don't even need to return home from their flights. They are not weapons platforms. They are the weapons. And so the fact that a human being flying a fighter jet, right? That fighter jet has to come home. It's got to sit on an airfield. It's got to get repaired, refitted, refueled, get more weapons. Each one of those weapons cost probably as much as these drones, the collective strike package of these drones cost. So let's actually put some numbers to this, right? Cost average. Let's use the American workhorse, the Hellfire missile. This is a incredibly standard air-to-ground missile strike, and it costs around $100,000. Let's pretend, for the sake of argument, that these drones were cost as much as the fiber optic drones that we've heard so much about, that they are $5,000 drones. FYI, guys, these are almost certainly not. They were almost certainly cheaper to produce. They're probably really, 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 really carefully QA'd. But you're talking about one Hellfire could get you 20 of these drones. So you can see that the math, this is like, would you ever be an Uber driver when your competition is AI cars? AIs, right? Waymos running around your city. You would never make any money. You would make $1 or $2 an hour at most. So that's the math that the US is finding itself, right? You do not want to be Russia with $1 billion in aircraft being smoked by $500 AI-powered drones. And here's the other thing, is that Ukraine is going to make 10 million air, land, and sea drones in a year. I actually think they're probably right. Their goal last year was 2 million, but once you get good at something, right, this is how an economy of scale and scaling up works. They are so much better now. And remember, it costs $0 to copy software. It literally, you guys know how a program works, right? It doesn't cost Microsoft anything for you to install another copy of Microsoft Word on your computer. So picture this, 10 million drones, right? All operating autonomously, continually. And this is when we talk about things like the drone wall, this is what we talk about. Imagine being a Russian infantry assault unit and being told, great, you're going to target these Ukrainian positions 10 kilometers away. But in that 10 kilometers, a army of autonomous drones has been deployed and has been instructed, listen, within these corridors, within this 10-kilometer band, there is no friendly forces. There are no civilians. All of them have been evacuated. So anything you see, any human being, any vehicle, any of it, target and destroy, right? And even if it takes 3 or 4 drones to take out even a single soldier, it is still so much cheaper. Remember, 10 million drones, the Russians raise about 20,000 troops a month. So literally at this math, every single Russian that gets recruited this year, could be hit by 9 drones? Absolutely insane numbers. And so the takeaway here, I think we're going to look back and we're going to say this was the moment. This was when the AI warfare became normal. And we've already heard it, right? For example, the commander of Indo-PACOM, right? This is the American, the Pacific Command. Let's see if we can find it. Let's see if we can find him. Yeah. So the commander of Indo-PACOM said that the key to maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific, i.e. protecting Taiwan, involves creating what he called a hellscape of drones protecting the Strait of Taiwan, right? Here we go. This is a direct quote from the commander of Indo-PACOM. He said, quote, "I want to turn the Taiwan Strait into an unmanned hellscape using a number of classified capabilities," Paparo said. This was in last year, July of 2024. So just under a year later, that seems to be an unclassified reality. He continues, "So that I can make their lives, this is an invading Chinese force, utterly miserable for a month, which buys me time for the rest of everything," right? And but imagine, again, that was a year ago. Remember, a year ago, Ukraine said they hope to manufacture 2 million drones. Now they're up to 10 million. Imagine having 10 million drones sitting in bunkers in Taiwan every time the Chinese try to push across the strait, right? The drones simply have standing orders. Tell the drones, there are no civilian aircraft. There are no civilian watercraft. There are no friendly watercraft in this area. If you see a vessel, destroy it, period. Imagine if that were the instructions that these drones were given, right? You would literally, this is what they talk about, right? They say, oh, it'll make their lives miserable for a month. But if you can produce 1 million of these a year, you could do it for more than a month, right? It would be, a year plus. I mean, look at the Russian advance now. When drones are not powered by AI, Russia still cannot over ground where you can walk. Russia is still powerless to advance, right? Before we talk about the little bit of math, I'm going to look at how wide the Taiwan Strait is and compare that to Russia's advances. But before I do that, I want to mention that when there's operations like this, the actual footage of the strikes, I can't put it on YouTube. YouTube is so strict and is becoming more strict about censoring creators who talk about warfare. But guess what, guys? The reality is that, this is uncensored combat footage or whatever, but it's also reality. This is the world, right? So you may not like it. YouTube may not want us to see it, but you have to see it to understand the world that does exist, right? The world doesn't have censors. Reality doesn't have censors. So if you are interested in supporting me in my analysis and getting access not just to the latest uncensored combat footage analysis, but an archive of hundreds of videos of uncensored combat footage going back to the start of the war, you want to support me over on combatvetnews.com. The link is in the description. So, right, any one of these tiers gets you access to the members-only videos in the archive. But if you want access to the Q&A and the special shout-outs, that is for the lieutenant and colonel tier, right? The Q&A is a weekly AMA, just like they do on Reddit. So, the link is in the description. Check it out. Okay, so here's what I want to do, right? Let's see. What is the length of the Taiwan Strait? So It is, oh shit, guys. They're fucked. It is 110 miles, 180 kilometers, right? So join me, if you will, in seeing how far back 180 kilometers is. So let's look at one of the furthest points of Russian advance. Here we go. We'll use the tip of Pokrovsk, right? And so we'll use this tip of Pokrovsk here. How far is this? This is, oh God, this is only 50 kilometers, right? So imagine, and remember guys, wow, this would, okay, so 180 kilometers puts you basically back to the Russian border, even at the deepest point of Russian penetration. And I point this out because remember, this is ground. So troops can walk across it. There's tree cover, there's forests, there's all this sorts of cover. In a body of water, there's nothing. There is no concealment. There is no cover. There is no protection of any kind, right? You cannot conceal yourself from drones, from satellites, from any of it. And the Chinese military will have to mount up a bunch of human landing craft and push them across open water to get to Taiwan. So imagine if you could deploy a Ukrainian-style drone wall in Taiwan. It would be viciously effective, right? The losses on the Chinese side would probably number something in the hundreds of thousands. So, yeah. If you're the Chinese, you look at this and you are sweating because there's this one thing this is demonstrated. It's that offense has a hard task in front of it, whereas defense, some ways, it's never looked easier. But also the threats, just the idea that you can strike a target without a human being involved is also kind of terrifying, right? As someone else has pointed out, other commentators, what's to stop the Chinese from loading a shipping container full of drones, which FYI, guys, you can order Chinese-made drones on Amazon. So those containers already get shipped over. There's nothing suspicious about them. The only difference would be that, like the Ukrainians, if they say, hey, we want to ship this container to the Amazon warehouse nearest a major military installation, let's say Fort Hood. Well, we're going to ship this container there. We're going to plop it down the Amazon warehouse right next to it. And then we're going to just retract that roof, out go the drones, and they are trained on Abrams tanks. They're trained on Humvees. They're trained simply to target any individual that is walking around potentially the Fort Hood greater area. So, or whatever the hell they call it. Fort Wiggleworm. I don't know. They keep changing the names. So that, I think, is such an incredible danger. And again, even if the U.S. military was to detect these drones, who are you going to stop? Who's going to stop them, right? Like, there's no operator. There's no one to arrest and interrogate. There's no one to flip sides, right? You can't convince a drone to switch loyalties. You can't blackmail a drone. They will just hunt until they run out of battery or until they've taken out a target. It's pretty terrifying stuff. Anyway, I want to point out another story is that, one, these peace talks are still occurring. Ukraine and Russia both showing up, both Russia is really stringing Ukraine along at this point. And Ukraine at this point has realized, listen, Russia is not interested in peace. Ukraine is actually, as we've seen, been sort of holding itself back, saying, listen, we want to give these peace talks a real chance to occur. But every time there's a round of peace talks, you might recall the peace talks in March, for example, Russia preceded those peace talks by dropping a cluster bomb onto the downtown of a Ukrainian city far from the front lines, killing dozens and dozens of civilians who were coming back from their Easter Mass. So Russia has shown that, listen, they're not taking the actions that they believe in these peace talks and that they're taking them seriously. And Ukraine continuously was taking them seriously, was really withholding, was refraining from conducting these kind of attacks, simply to kind of create this like good faith environment. I think they finally have said, listen, if Russia is going to operate this way, why are we hamstringing ourselves by saying, oh, we won't do strikes into Russia to show how serious we are about peace? Now they've said, listen, we're just going to throw this in the trash. We're happy to have this forum where Russia can, talk to us. But as they point out, this has gone nowhere. And the fact is that Ukraine, again, has said, listen, we're happy to do a ceasefire, but they say, Russia, you have to, but Russia clearly isn't interested in a ceasefire without some kind of real change to the strategic balance. And that, I think, is what Ukraine is trying to do here, to say, listen, we need to change Putin's calculus, because today he thinks all the cards are in his favor. In fact, when even the US president tells Ukraine in public, oh, you don't have any cards, that is a signal to Putin, listen, these guys are not going to be, these guys are facing defeat, right? You should absolutely not strike a deal with them now. And the fact that master negotiator Donald Trump doesn't understand this is a kind of insane. But these talks, now Ukraine has finally said, listen, we're going to change the strategic balance. We are going to diminish Russia's ability to enforce its nuclear triad, to make it look in greater danger than ever before. And as we point out, Russia has not submitted the memorandum outlining peace terms. That's because, of course, as we know on this channel, Russia doesn't have concrete peace terms. They keep changing. They keep altering. They don't make any sense. Every day is something new, right? And of course, in exchange, right, Kiev is actually laying out a potential viable path to the end of the war. Again, but this is mostly a performance by the Ukrainians to show, listen, we are serious about the war. We are taking these steps towards peace. It's Russia who is not taking any concrete steps. And here's what's going to happen. Russia's going to announce a statement. They're going to go, we were so ready for peace, guys. We were totally about to do a peace. There was going to be so much peace. We were about to do it. You guys we're so impatient. And then you launch this strike and now there's not going to be any peace, right? And this is exactly what Russia's going to say, because that's exactly what President Trump is prepared to hear. But as we point out, that basically Trump is now being excluded by everyone else, right? Trump wasn't told in advance about Ukraine's drone strike on Russian bombers, probably because President Trump explicitly said, I protect Vladimir Putin. Guys, when you tweet things like bad things would have happened to Vladimir Putin if I hadn't intervened, that's a clue that you shouldn't tell him about bad things that are about to happen to Vladimir Putin, right? So, of course, they weren't going to say anything. And here's the problem. What's going to happen? Like, the U.S. already withdrew their military assistance. They are already not sanctioning Russia for violating the peace agreements or for committing war crimes. What on earth is left for the U.S. to do, Ukraine says. So, if they're not going to do anything, why should we tell them what's happening? Why should we bring them into the fold when there's nothing they can offer us anymore, right? So, again, White House not notified about the plans. In fact, CBS's source within the Trump administration also confirmed that the administration was not informed, right? So, this is exactly what we might expect. And as we point out, that despite the utter failure of these peace talks, despite Russia being completely unwilling to even put together a totally false and nonsensical document outlining peace terms, Trump's going to not sanction Moscow. So that the Ukrainians are like, listen, we're done going through the president because he's not a credible actor and he doesn't actually have the spine or ability to coerce Vladimir Putin to do anything. Anyway, guys, that is really all I had. Thank you so much to all of our folks, particularly guys like James Porsche, B. Hammerling, James J21, Yanko Georgiev, Chris Gorsuch, Paul Templeton, Citronics, and Steve Moran, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. I'll see you guys over on there tomorrow, where we're going to take a look at probably some of the footage from this strike itself, right? Pretty salacious, pretty crazy, and we're going to size up just what exactly was the Ukrainian tactical aspects of the attack. Cheers.